Welcome back to the channel. Earlier in my videos, you may have seen the video on the Triton 2000 TR21 makeover, and I've done a lot of work over the years to get the boat to a state where I'm really happy and proud of it. However, my trailer has been a little neglected in that department, so I definitely needed some improvements on it. And one of my buddies, Terry Conroy, is going to be doing his trailer and specifically his bunks in the spring. So I thought, you know what, I'm in the process, I may as well make a video. And I by no means claim to be a trailer expert. However, I am going to show you from my fishing experience and boating experience, you know, what's worked for me and what's been a good fix. So some of you may not necessarily agree with how I do it, and that's just fine. This is what's working for me, and I am going to stick with it because it's been successful. So hopefully you enjoy this video on how to replace the trailer bunks, as well as doing the fenders and the side rails. So let's get to it. The trailer is 21 years old, and believe it or not, this is the original bunk carpeting, so it has lasted very well. You can see in the bottom right hand corner of the bunk that there is some wood exposed. Over here it's just kind of flat and crusty, and it's just basically worn out, so it's definitely time to be replaced. This is the bottom of the bunk, and once again, it is the original wood that is in this bunk. And, you know, as I said, 21 years, it's lasted very well. Now, this is testing my memory. If I remember correctly, the original bunk was mounted with this type of lag screw. And it was simply, you know, brought up through, this is again the bottom, so it was brought up through the back, and then this was simply just screwed in, therefore securing the bunk to the trailer. Well, I gotta tell you a little story. It was probably about 10 years ago or so, and I was fishing the Canada-US Walleye Tournament, and I launched in the Lindsay River in Ontario. And as I launched, those of you that have fished in the Lindsay River in around the springtime, when the walleye are going, you will know that there's a little bit of current coming through the river. And as I launched, I saw a bunk floating beside me, and lo and behold, yep, it was mine. So the lag screw, or whatever was initially in there, basically the wood had rotted out a little bit, and the bunk had worn a hole and it came off. So I had to change my bunk system, and I'll show you how I fixed that in a minute. Well, this is the solution that we came up with. The wood had obviously had some rot to it, so it was one of those things that we needed to come up with a solution, and I could have used a bigger screw, but then coming through from the bottom, but then I thought, you know, and you know, a good friend of mine, Len Graves, you know, gave me a good suggestion. He said, why don't you get some carriage bolts? So we went and we got some 3/8 inch carriage bolts, and we got a washer, a lock washer, and he said the double nut system is the way to go. And 10 years later, that same piece of wood, the original piece of wood that was on the Triton trailer, was still being used, and I had never had an issue with the bunks coming loose or coming off. So therefore, when I went to the new bunks, I continued to use this system. This is one of the actual carriage bolts that came off of the bunk when I took it off, and I bought new carriage bolts and nuts to replace it, because it was just obviously time. But I know some of you are going to say, well, you know, stainless is the way to go, and I wouldn't argue with that. But I mean, after 10 years, you know, this carriage bolt is still in pretty darn good shape, so I have no hesitancy in going back to using the galvanized, you know, carriage bolts that we used 10 years ago, because they certainly stood the test of time. and that's why I did it the way I am doing it on the new ones. Here's what the top dome, the rounded part of the carriage, will look like in the bunks that I had it in to fix the problem of the bunk floating down the river. And it is well below the surface of the carpet, and it may look like it's exposed a little bit there, but if I actually had the nuts back on it underneath, it would actually suck that down underneath the layer of the wood. So when the boat was coming on, it was skimming well over that. So I never had an issue. Obviously, when I am doing this on the new bunks, I am going to be able, because I'm starting with a new piece of pressure treated wood, I am going to be able to have that underneath the carpeting, and again, it will be below the surface of the wood, so it will be flush, so there'll never be an issue. Even as the new carpet eventually starts to wear out, there will never be a problem with exposing the bottom of the boat to the top of this carriage bolt. And that's the solution, and that's the story behind why I did the mounting system as I'm about to do it. I picked the good side of the wood to go on the bunk where the carpeting is going to be facing the bottom of the boat, and I clamped it together, and then I flipped it over and drilled from the other side. With the wood centered and clamped underneath, I don't have it clamped right now, but I'm just trying to give you the idea. I simply drilled through. You can see where it was sitting on the trailer mount, and I just drilled the 2 holes right through and drilled the 2 holes right through, marking which was the front and which was the back. Doing it this way should allow for no error when I go to remount the new bunks, because the whole pattern is taken directly from the old one. So should be a pretty quick and efficient process. And obviously we will see when I go to put everything together. Here's the old long bunk, and I'm just gonna go for a quick little walk up here. Sorry for the shaking. And I just used the existing hole patterns as the template for the new pressure treated wood. I wanna just do a quick demo of how I recessed the carriage bolt. So obviously I'm just gonna use a test sample here on a piece of wood. So I drilled my 3/8 inch hole using the template of the old bunks. That was the first thing. Taking a 3/4 inch drill bit like this, obviously matched to the size of the head of the carriage bolt. Then I basically took my drill, and I used a test piece of wood as per my buddy Don's advice. And I just simply drilled out a little bit. And obviously I didn't want to go too deep. I just wanted to kind of bury the head of the bolt. Some people say you could just pound it in, but I just figured it was a little easier and less stressful to use this drill bit. And once again, I went maybe about 1/8 or no more than certainly 1/4 of an inch. And then I clean out the hole, and then I simply tap the carriage bolt in with the hammer, and I will show you that next. I am guessing in hindsight that there's probably a more efficient way of, making this little depression for the head of the carriage bolt. I could have drilled the hole maybe, 1/8 of an inch deep, but I was going through the other bunk and it was hard to see. And in all honesty, my buddy Don, who's a cabinet maker, suggested just, get a test piece of wood and try it and see how it goes. And in actuality, the base of the triangle here that starts to penetrate the wood is probably pretty close to 3/8 of an inch. So it centered itself pretty darn well. And, I was quite happy with it. So I could have, as I say, just, punched it in the wood, but I thought this was a little smoother process to do it, and it really took no time at all. Now that the hole is there and I have the spacing for the head, I can just push that in a little bit, and just taking my hammer and then just hammering it, was not on the smooth surface, but you can tell there that basically that is just raised up ever so slightly above the wood. And if I was on a firmer surface here, I could have pounded that in just a little bit more so it was flush. And the other thing too is when I do the double nut system, it's going to suck that in. And this was just an old test hole underneath here too. It wouldn't look like that underneath. It should be just flat as well. So just bear in mind that somehow I accidentally lined that up. Who knew? For demonstration purposes, I am going to fast forward to the finished product and show you how to double nut the bunks. It is much easier to demonstrate this here than opposed to laying underneath the trailer. So here we go. I'm going to take my flat washer. I'm going to put it on. And then I am going to take my lock washer and I am going to take my nut and I'm going to put it on. And I'm going to take my wrench, which is a 9/16 wrench, and I am going to snug it up and I am going to tighten it up. And what I am trying to do is I want to compress the lock washer against the flat washer. And I also want to snug it up enough so that it's nice and tight. And what that's going to do is it's also going to suck in the head of the carriage bolt on the opposite side, which is going to help keep it at least flush or slightly below the surface of the wood on the top side underneath the carpeting. And I've got that pretty snug. And then I'm going to take the next nut and I'm going to put it on. And I am going to take my 9/16 wrench and I'm going to put it on the bottom nut. And then I'm going to take my socket set and I'm simply going to hold the bottom nut in place and I'm going to tighten the top nut against the bottom nut, and that's going to lock it into place. And that is the system that I used on my old bunks, and in my personal opinion it works much better than simply putting a lag screw in. If the wood starts to rot a little bit, the lag screw is going to fall out like happened to me. But in this case, it's going to be better because it's going to hold on. And I know that from experience that it does work. So that's why I have gone to this system. For this project, we also used a new air staple gun, and we didn't really know how it would work. So it's always a good idea as well. You can see that I used it initially and I did a whole bunch of test holes and there was no staples coming out, and then I actually was not loading the air gun quite correctly, and once I figured out how to do it, you can see there's a staple that is going very nicely into the wood, and there's another staple going nicely into the wood. So it's a good idea to test your staple gun out on a scrap piece of wood as well, just to make sure that it's stapling the way you want it to. This is the stapler that we used with the air compressor. For those of you that are curious about the mistake I made with the stapler, I loaded the staples in from the top and then I push this in and it clicks and it locks, and you would think it would work, but no, it didn't. In the instructions it says to load it upside down, and after I actually watched somebody else's YouTube video, you actually put the staples in upside down, and then as you close it, that pushes against the staples, and that was the difference between me getting a compression hole with no staple and getting the actual staples going in the way they were supposed to. So a little tip on how to load a staple gun. You can see the carriage bolts are already installed, and they are going to be obviously on the bottom side, and that's where I'm going to use the dual nut system and the washer. Here's what I ended up using. I used the C-Choice bunk carpeting, 12-inch by 100-foot, so I made sure I had lots of extra, and just in case I need to do a touch-up job at some point on one of the bunks. It says 100% UV polyester and minimum water retention, which should hopefully lighten up the bunks. The old ones were pretty darn heavy. For those of you that are curious as to how much carpeting I used, it was short bunks 12 feet, the fenders 12.5 feet, the side rails 6 feet 2 inches, and 22 feet on the long bunks for a total of 52 feet 8 inches. As for the carpet, there is a side that is not the plush carpeted side, and you can see when I turn it over, it's a much nicer carpet versus just, basically the backing. I watched several YouTube videos and they recommended leaving about 6 inches on the end, so that's what I did. And I put the board on top and then I centered it and measured it, and you can see that I marked it first with a black permanent marker, but I just had some kids' sidewalk chalk and I used that. And sorry again for a little bit of shaking, but I'm moving. And there's the second set of carriage bolts in place. And coming up here, there it is there. Again, I have 6 inches on the end, the final carriage bolts, and that is the carpet cutout ready to install. Here are the carriage bolts inserted into the wood. This is going to be the finished carpeting side, and obviously I don't want the carriage bolts sticking up. So once again, I just simply drilled the 3/8 inch hole, and then I took the 3/4 inch hole cutting drill bit and I basically recessed it in about probably 1/8 to not quite 1/4 inch, but closer to 1/8. And then I took the hammer and I pounded it in so that it was flush with the top of the wood. So you can see that it's not sticking out at all. Here are all the carpet pieces cut out. You can see that I have once again marked all of them with the chalk line, and I am going to put a little bit of adhesive on the face of the wood just to hold the carpeting in place. I know some people say not to, but I've decided that I think that's the best course of action, and it'll make stapling easier. The challenging part is going to be on my Triton TR21 is going to be these Fender carpeting pads, which thankfully they were made out of composite so that I didn't have to cut a awkward piece of wood. And I have about 1 inch on either side to fold over, and I have a friend over with me to help me basically seal that in place because it's going to be a pretty tight fit. So I'm using this AC50 adhesive, and basically I'm just spraying the face of the wood and then pushing it down into the marks that I've made pre-measured to save time, and it's a fast hack adhesive, so it's just more efficient to have it pre-marked and measured. So the board, I'm using actually the old bunks, and the carriage bolts are in, and this is just going to be a nice holder to spray the adhesive a little more easily and effectively. And Peter is just walking along it right now, and then we're still going to roll it, but we're just trying to get that initial seal, and everything's flat on the floor of the garage just to kind of get a good starting point. And we are tacking all of the boards first to the carpet, and then we will do our stapling at the end. So this is the bottom side of the board, and this is going to be the starboard board, and I have marked the front and the back, and this should be visible the whole way through the process because I won't have enough carpeting to get all the way to there, so I'll know exactly which way it goes to be inserted. Marking the bottom side of the bunk between the carpet stapled down allows me to see the correct orientation of the bunk as it should be placed on the trailer. F facing forward, the B facing backwards, and the S in brackets for the starboard side. So this is the long board, and again I've got Peter walking on it. All right, Peter, say hi, wave to everybody.
Hi everybody.
And he's just walking down, and then we're going to take it to the sawhorse, and then we're going to roll it on there just to make sure we have no air bubbles on the surface, and that's next. Once we have it glued, we are just taking a baking roller and rolling it out just to kind of make sure it's nice and smooth, and didn't put a real thick layer of adhesive on, just enough to grip it so it'll make it easier to staple, and that's the next step. I put a post on the Triton Boats website to glue or not to glue. Peter, can you just give that a little shake there? And you can see that that carpeting is in place, and it's going to make our life stapling much easier. And again, using stainless steel staples, and I'm using 1/2 inch, and we're about to get that started next. One of the big advantages of using the adhesive was just holding it in place so that when you get to the stapling process, you can see that by the tape measure I have about 1 3/4 inches at the top and about 1 3/4 inches at the bottom. And that made stapling very easy and efficient because I didn't have a short side and a long side. It was all even, and that was because of the preliminary steps of gluing and sealing it in place. And after doing this job, I would highly recommend that you do it that way because it's much easier, especially if you are working by yourself. Throughout the process, I've made a note. In this case, this is the front of the bunk. It's the top side that's going to be facing up, and this is the port side bunk. Here is the back of the bunk, and I did sand the corners just to make sure that they were smooth to avoid any touching of the carpet. And once again, this is the bottom, the top side that's going to be up, and it's port side. In order to do the end cuts, my square, it's 1.5 inches on this side, so I'm going to cut a slit here, and I'm going to cut a slit here, and then I've already done it on this side, and then I got rid of this corner piece, and then when we fold it up, it's going to fold in, and then I'm going to cut it off there, and then I'll have another flap here, fold in, and then another flap, so it'll be triple layered on the end, so it will be nice and solid. And we just flip the square, and then just going to cut off that excess piece there to get rid of it. All right, we have the board and the carpet stapled together, and we're coming down to the ends here, and the ends now have been cut. So basically fold one end in, we're going to staple it in the other end and on top, and then the final piece comes up and seals it in, and we're just going to put staples on the back side here where you're not going to see them. We are using a air compressor electric stapler. It is way easier, and staples are stainless steel 1/2 inch staples that we are using. Now doing the end cuts for the longboard. Once again, we're just going to take the 1.5 inch square, cut a slit here, cut a slit here, and then I'll show you in a second how we just take that piece off, and then that's going to make our fold. So we're going to end up with a slit here, folds, and this piece that is going to fold and seal everything in. So we have our piece here that is going to be the fold in piece, and then we are just going to snip this piece off here, and that will be gone. And you can see now that this piece is removed, and then when we fold it up, it's just going to seal across here, and we're going to do the same to the opposite side. Well, we are doing the Fender. Again, it's a Triton TR21 year 2000, and we've needed some seamstress advice here, so we consulted our wives, and we were told to cut notches, and the notches are going to help us fold it in so that we don't have buckles in the carpeting. We put some screws in for the mounting holes to the trailer, just so that we knew where they were. And again, you can see another screw there, and we had a screw in the bottom corner kind of thing. So that is mounted with the little wedges cut out to make it go smoother. Looking at the job in retrospect, I didn't need to have 6 inches overlap on this end. I could have saved a little bit of material. And again, 6 inches overlap at that end. You can see the patterning on the back when it's all done with the wedges cut out. And that was the trickiest part of it. The top and bottom, I only had about 1 inch of overlap, and you can see all the staples, so it's very well stapled at this point to hold together. Oh wow. And there's what it looks like, all finished on the good side. Since the trailer was 21 years old and the bunks and the side carpeting here over the tires has never been done, we had to drill out the nuts and bolts that were on there, and when we did, they were pretty close to the tires. So Jeff came up with the idea from Triton in Cambridge, Ontario. He came up with the idea of using rivets instead, and that was a great option. Here's an example of the trifold rivet that was placed on the composite and carpet fenders. And you will notice that it is a nice rounded surface, but there is a lot of clearance between the tire, so I am not concerned at all about the rivet doing any damage to the tire. The rivets, much like the carriage bolts, have a dome top, and if there was anything extending out above it, we tapped it in so that it's a nice smooth surface. The boat generally doesn't really ever hit this anyways, so it's going to hit the carpet first before it hits that. It's recessed in, you know, as far as we could get it. So it's you know, a really good solution. And I mean, the rivets, I'm going to paint them flat black so that they're not as prominent, you know, so it just cosmetically will make it better. So I will show you the after part when I have finished painting them. My flat black paint didn't seem to want to stick to the rivets for whatever reason, but my gloss black did. And you can see clearly the difference, that it just blends in nicely now, and it actually matches the paint on the trailer, which is a gloss black as well. A washer was added behind the rivet because the composite material that is underneath here, some of it was damaged while we were trying to get the original nuts and bolts out, and it was just a way to reinforce it. Plus, a new hole was drilled, as were most of the rivets. A new hole was drilled so that the rivet could, you know, be the proper rivet for that diameter. The side rails are mounted a little differently, and the carpeting goes all the way around them, so they were actually quite challenging to do. One of the things that I didn't notice was that the seam where the carpeting comes together is actually on the bottom, because both sides are actually visible when it's on the boat trailer. So in hindsight, I would have done it differently than gluing to the center like I did, because that changed where the seam could be located. Because the seam is not located on the bottom, unfortunately, you are going to be able to see where it is joined along here. And it's not the best job that we could have done, but at the end of the day, it's well covered and well sealed, and the boat is going to be protected where it needs to be protected. So we left it out. The side rails where they face the boat are certainly going to be very clean and smooth, just like they are supposed to be. It's just on the back side that you will be able to see the seam. So if I were doing it all over again, I would certainly do a better job the next time. Stainless steel hardware is being used on the side rails, and that is because it will be visible at all times, as opposed to the galvanized hardware that is underneath the bunks, completely not visible. Well, the bunks are all done, and I'm really happy with how they turned out. And we will be installing them in the next couple of days, so I am looking forward to seeing them on the newly painted trailer. Should be fun and exciting. Big job, nice to have it done. The side rails are done and in, and quite happy with them. And just use the old caps from the back, and it looks good. Happy with it. The bunks are in, and they are double nutted, and once again, they look great, and very happy with how the bunks have turned out on the trailer. It was definitely a fun project, time consuming, but it was enjoyable and it looks so much better. When you compare the finish with the new bunks versus the old bunks, there's just literally no comparison. Definitely a great upgrade to the trailer. One of the long bunks needed a little coercion to line up with the holes for the carriage bolts, and in hindsight I may not have used the old board as a template, but it worked well in all of the other boards. I think there was some warp or bend to the one board, and when it was loaded on, originally it was probably coerced a little bit too, so when I simply copied the pattern, then I had to coerce it as well. So you may not want to do that directly, as you could just put the boards on and then line them up with the holes and mark them and do it that way. So it's an option. As I say, it was only trouble on one of the bunk boards. Well, here's the trailer. We still have some work to do. The paint's got us set, but overall it's pretty happy with it, and looks way better and much safer. Special thanks to Jeff at Triton in Cambridge. Before I wrap up this video, I want you to look at the following 3 pictures, and they are going to show you some of the safety concerns that were very evident and became a driving force behind this whole trailer restoration project. So take a look, and here we go. This slot created by the bolt on the equalizer could have caused a disaster on the highway. These 2 photos show that there was stress and cracking on some of the welds of the cross members to the main frame of the trailer. Therefore, welding needed to be done. If you want to make sure that you do not miss the trailer restoration project, then please subscribe to the channel, as I will do a complete video of the restoration, and it will be my 2000 Triton TR21 custom EZ Loader boat trailer makeover. A very special thank you to Peter Hardy for all his help with the trailer bunk replacement. It's a good thing they don't pay me by the hour. I'm not saying that I work the quickest, but I like to be thorough, and I've been described as meticulous before, and that's okay, as I definitely like to try to get the job done right the first time. So once again, Peter, thank you for your help and your company while doing the trailer bunks. As always, I always appreciate the guidance and support from Jeff Tunks at Triton Tool in Cambridge, Ontario. He does an amazing job, and he's meticulous like I am, and I'm always super happy with what I get done at Triton Tool. So I again give a huge shout out to him, and when the trailer restoration project video comes out, he was instrumental in making this restoration makeover project a success. So thanks again, Jeff. I always appreciate your help.